Autumn rain pelted against the cracked window of the small apartment as 22-year-old Rebecca Martinez bounced her 6-month-old son Diego gently in her arms. The baby's soft whimpers echoed through the sparse living room, where a single couch sat facing a small television that hadn't worked in months. Rebecca hummed a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, her voice trembling slightly as she calculated the remaining bills scattered across the coffee table. 3 months had passed since Marcus, Diego's father, had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only empty promises and unpaid rent notices. Rebecca's part-time job at the local diner barely covered the basics, and each day felt like a precarious balancing act between hope and desperation. Yet as she looked down at Diego's innocent face, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light from the single working lamp, she found strength she never knew existed. "We're going to be okay, mi amor," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Mama will figure something out." The next morning brought crisp October air and the familiar weight of worry as Rebecca prepared for another day of job hunting. With Diego secured in his worn but clean stroller, she ventured into downtown Riverside, a mid-sized city where opportunity seemed as elusive as the morning mist. Her destination was the financial district, where she'd heard several businesses were hiring administrative assistants. As she navigated the bustling sidewalks, Rebecca couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her faded jeans and second-hand sweater and the polished professionals hurrying past in their tailored suits. She pulled Diego's blanket tighter around him, shielding him from both the cool breeze and the judgmental stares that seemed to follow young mothers pushing strollers through business districts. The imposing glass facade of Hartwell & Associates investment firm loomed before her as she approached the building's entrance. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see elegantly dressed receptionists and men in expensive suits, discussing deals that probably involved more money than she'd see in a lifetime. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca smoothed her hair and prepared to enter when a heart-wrenching sound stopped her in her tracks. Crying. Not the typical fussing of an overtired child, but the raw, desperate sobs of someone in genuine distress. Rebecca turned to see a boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, sitting alone on a bench near the building's entrance. His school uniform was pristine, navy blazer, pressed khaki pants, and polished shoes that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly grocery budget, but his face was streaked with tears. Diego began to stir in his stroller, making soft, cooing sounds as if sensing the other child's distress. Rebecca glanced at the building entrance, knowing that every minute she delayed could mean missing an opportunity for employment, but the sight of the crying boy pulled at something deep within her maternal instincts. "Hey there," she said gently, approaching the bench with Diego's stroller. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The boy looked up, his green eyes red-rimmed and filled with a sadness that seemed far too mature for his young face. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself in a way that suggested he'd been taught that crying wasn't acceptable. "I'm fine," he mumbled, but his voice cracked with emotion. Rebecca knelt beside the stroller, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. "It's okay to not be fine sometimes. What's your name?" "Timothy," he whispered, glancing nervously at the building behind them. "Timothy Hartwell." The surname registered immediately. This was no ordinary child. The Hartwell family name was synonymous with wealth and influence in Riverside, their investment firm one of the most prestigious in the region. Yet here sat this little boy, alone and crying, as if he carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders. "That's a strong name," Rebecca said with a warm smile. "I'm Rebecca, and this little guy is Diego. He's 6 months old and thinks everything is fascinating." As if on cue, Diego gurgled happily, reaching his tiny hand toward Timothy. Despite his tears, Timothy's expression softened slightly as he looked at the baby. "He's really small." "He is, but he's tough. We both are." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance while making it clear she wasn't going anywhere. "Do you want to tell me what's making you so sad? Sometimes talking helps." Timothy hesitated, clearly torn between the need to confide in someone and what appeared to be years of conditioning to keep family matters private. "My mom, she's been gone for 2 weeks now. Dad says she's on a business trip, but I heard the housekeeper talking to the cook. She said Mom left because she couldn't handle our family anymore." Rebecca's heart clenched. Here was a child who had everything money could buy, yet he was experiencing the same abandonment she'd felt when Marcus left. The circumstances were different, but the pain in Timothy's eyes was achingly familiar. "I'm so sorry, Timothy. That must be really scary and confusing." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small packet of tissues, offering them to him. "You know what, though? Sometimes when grown-ups leave, it has nothing to do with the kids they're leaving behind. Sometimes they're dealing with their own problems that are too big for them to handle." Timothy took the tissues gratefully. "But what if she never comes back? What if I did something wrong?" "Oh, honey." Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. "I can tell just by looking at you that you're a good kid. Whatever your mom is going through, it's not your fault. And even if she doesn't come back, you're going to be okay." "Do you know how I know that?" Timothy shook his head, his attention completely focused on Rebecca's words. "Because you have something really special inside you. You have the ability to care about others, to feel things deeply. That's going to make you strong, even when things get hard." From somewhere high above them, behind the tinted windows of the Hartwell building, a figure stood watching the scene unfold below, his expression unreadable as he observed his son finding comfort in the words of a stranger with a baby stroller. 3 floors above the street scene, Jonathan Hartwell stood at his corner office window, his phone pressed to his ear as he half listened to a client discussing portfolio adjustments. His attention, however, was completely fixed on the young woman sitting beside his son on the bench below. He'd been searching for Timothy for the past 20 minutes after receiving a call from the boy's private school reporting his absence. "Mr. Hartwell, are you still there?" The client's voice crackled through the phone. "I'll have to call you back," Jonathan said abruptly, ending the call without waiting for a response. He watched as the woman, he could see she was young, probably in her early 20s, handed Timothy tissues and spoke to him with a gentleness that made something in Jonathan's chest tighten uncomfortably. For the past 2 weeks, since Catherine had packed her designer luggage and left with nothing more than a note saying she needed space to find herself, Jonathan had struggled to connect with his son. Every attempt at conversation ended in awkward silences or Timothy retreating to his room. The boy had stopped eating properly, his grades were slipping, and the expensive child psychologist Jonathan had hired seemed to be making little progress. Yet here was this stranger, and Timothy was actually talking to her. Jonathan loosened his tie and headed for the elevator, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor of the lobby as he approached the building's entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see that the conversation was continuing, and remarkably, Timothy was no longer crying. "You know what helps me when I'm feeling really sad?" Rebecca was saying as Jonathan stepped outside, positioning himself where he could hear but remain unnoticed. "I think about all the people who need help, and I try to do something kind for them. It reminds me that even when my world feels upside down, I can still make someone else's day a little brighter." Timothy wiped his nose and looked at Diego, who was making happy, babbling sounds from his stroller. "Like how you stopped to talk to me." "Exactly. And look how talking to you has made my day better too. Diego and I were feeling pretty nervous about going into that big building, but meeting you reminded us that there are good people everywhere, even in scary places." Jonathan frowned. Why would she be nervous about entering his building? He studied her more carefully, taking in her worn but clean clothing, the second-hand stroller, and the way she held herself with dignity despite clearly limited means. She was beautiful in an understated way, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and warm brown eyes that seemed to radiate compassion. "Are you looking for a job?" Timothy asked, displaying the kind of perceptiveness that had always impressed Jonathan, even as it sometimes unnerved him. Rebecca nodded. "I am. Diego and we're on our own now, and I need to find work so I can take good care of him." "My dad owns this building," Timothy said quietly. "Well, his company does. Maybe he could help you." Jonathan's breath caught. In all the months since Catherine had begun pulling away from their family, and especially in the week since she'd left, Timothy had barely mentioned him to anyone. Yet here he was, suggesting his father as a solution to this young woman's problems. "That's very sweet of you to think of that," Rebecca said, "but I'm sure your dad is a very busy man. Besides, I don't have much experience with the kind of work they probably do in there. I've been working at Tony's Diner downtown, but they had to cut my hours because business has been slow." Diego began to fuss, and Rebecca immediately stood to rock the stroller gently. Jonathan watched, mesmerized by the natural ease with which she soothed the baby. Catherine had never been comfortable with Timothy as an infant, always calling for the nanny at the first sign of crying or discomfort. "My mom used to sing to me when I was upset," Timothy said wistfully, before she got too busy with her charity events and book club meetings. Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. "Would you like me to sing something to Diego? Sometimes babies like it when different people sing to them, and maybe it would remind you of some happy times with your mum." Timothy nodded eagerly,